Good afternoon. My name is Lucy Aquino, Chief Executive Officer of Hispocare, a program of Advocate Illinois Masonic Hospital and affiliated with Gottlieb Memorial Hospital. Today, you're watching CAN TV Cable 21, a live interactive show. For the next 25 minutes, we will be discussing living will and estate planning. We invite you to call with any of your questions. Lines are now open at area code 312-738-1060. The phone number is also at the bottom of your screen. Joining me today is Mr. Burt Brown, attorney at law. Allow me to welcome you and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, I know that this estate planning and living wills is such an important topic right now, and everyone should know what this is about. I mean, this is one of those things, or a couple of those things, that individuals who don't think they need this type of opportunities to make up these living wills and estate planning, these are so important that it avoids a lot of headaches later on. So with that being said, estate planning it's not just for the wealthy, it's not just for the elderly. It's putting yourself in control of how your assets are divided after you've died, you've left, and you've gone into a higher plane. So in order to save your family excessive taxes, legal fees, legal battles, and especially those family fights that we know happen all the time. So Mr. Brown, can you tell us, what is estate planning?
Well, Lucy, estate planning basically is a system that you create yourself for the orderly passing of your assets or your treasures. You know, assets can be treasures too, family heirlooms, things of that nature. And it's kind of like creating a roadmap to accomplish what you want to happen after you're gone. And that's basically what it is. It's a roadmap to get to that point.
And as we talk to roadmaps, obviously a roadmap is you get from point A to point B. So when you're planning this, so why does someone really need estate planning? Why? What are some real examples? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. You know, as you said in your opening remarks, estate planning is not just for the wealthy. It's for everybody. It differs in degree of what you really need in your particular situation, but you really need that to be able to tell the people that you leave behind how you want your affairs handled, what you want to happen to your assets. It's basically the only way to do that. Otherwise, somebody else will make the decision for you, or as you said earlier, you start these family feuds over money, assets, treasures, you name it, and it's going to happen, and it's going to cause a lot of anguish in the family that can be easily avoided by some proper planning beforehand.
And you see this all the time. I mean, I have seen families who will say to you, not in my family. We get along. We have an understanding. We already know what our loved ones want. We know what it is. But until it actually happens.
And the amazing part is when it does actually happen, you'll see that the friendliness and that agreement that you just spoke of sometimes tends to fade away a little bit, and if it doesn't disappear entirely, especially when there are assets worth a decent amount of money are involved, or even the family treasures. Pictures, heirlooms, anything you can think of, really, and you want to avoid that. And the person who's leaving the estate should think ahead of time that, do I want to chance this happening in my family? And it's so easy to avoid.
Yeah, families have actually been destroyed.
Absolutely.
Things like this. So for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Lucy Aquino, Chief Executive Officer of Hispocare, Inc., a program of Advocate Illinois Masonic Hospital and affiliated with Gottlieb Memorial. Joining me today is Mr. Burt Brown, lawyer, attorney at law. And I want to remind our viewers that if you have any questions regarding estate planning and living wills, our lines are now open. Area code 312-738-1060. The number's at the bottom of your screen. So, Mr. Brown, estate planning consists of several things. Can we go through those things?
Absolutely. Basically, everybody, regardless of their wealth, needs four elements or four components to the average estate planning program. and or plan. And that would be number one, a general power of attorney, sometimes referred to as a durable power of attorney. Then you would have a power of attorney for medical care. And when lawyers use the term power of attorney, what they're really saying is, and what that really means is, you're allowing somebody else to act as if you were acting yourself. So if we can maybe keep that in mind a little bit as we go through these. The third component would be the living will, and the fourth one would be the will.
Now, you mentioned living will. Now, we also have a situation, especially we're in healthcare, obviously, and hospitals are now asking patients to sign and do a advance directive with a living will.
Yes.
How does that differ from a living will as we're mentioning it here, or does it?
Well, it differs in the form probably that it takes, the completeness of it. The hospitals only have a limited interest, and that's really basically, do we resuscitate or we don't resuscitate. And in the living will that we would create, it would encompass a lot of other things. First of all, one of the things that you need to think about, or the testator would need to think about on all four of these elements, is who would they trust to give their power to? Would it be a relative, a spouse? Generally, it would be a husband or wife, each of them. And then maybe a third person, could be a family doctor, a friend, whoever you think you can rely upon, and that may change from time to time too. As people grow older, they move away.
So these four parts of these documents are so important. Why? I mean,
Well,
I know that some folks might do one or the other and not do them all, but there should be a four-part process.
Absolutely. They complement each other, and the four documents provide like an umbrella, and it covers all aspects of potential occurrences. For example, the general power of attorney handles business matters, but that contemplates, as does the power of attorney for health care, that there's going to be a recovery from whatever that illness may be. In looking at the living will, that does not contemplate a recovery. That contemplates just the opposite, no recovery. And it's a question of, let me give you an example. Somebody's in an automobile accident and they suffer severe brain damage. They're in Illinois Masonic Hospital. They no longer have any brain function. We have machines today, and have had them for a long time, that can keep your heart pumping, can keep your lungs pumping. What extent do you want that done for you? Or don't you want it done at all? That living will speaks for you, and it tells the doctors, this is what I want, this is what I don't want.
And this really avoids that argument that happens in cases such as this, where it's such an emotional time. Families cannot make up their minds and really have a clear picture, or better yet, if you haven't seen that family member in so long, you don't know what their wishes really were. And then you have other family members who said, well, I just had this conversation with them last week and this is what they wanted. But if it's not written down.
That's right. It has to be in writing.
Exactly.
There's no substitute for that. And, if you think about it, if you're the hospital, if you're Illinois Masonic Hospital or Northwestern or any of them, what if Susie comes in, the niece of the injured party, and she said, no, he was clear he didn't want that.
Right.
And now you have a conflict. I mean, the hospital or any medical provider does not want to get in the middle of that.
Right.
And then you wind up in a courtroom somewhere to make that decision by a judge. And, now you have a judge making the decision for the injured party instead of himself. So it creates a terrible situation for the families and the loved ones.
Many complications, and hence the arguments, and now these families who at one time got along very well are not getting along.
That's right. So many families have literally been destroyed, as you said earlier, by things like this, just poor planning, no planning, and it's so simple to do. And, most people will wait until there is an emergency or something to think about doing that, and I think it's psychological. When you think of a will or a living will, you're thinking of somebody dying.
Right? You're not thinking, right?
Yeah, you're certainly not thinking happy thoughts.
I've heard people tell me if I do that, I'm actually, jinxing myself.
I've heard that too.
You hear it all the time. But, better made plans are being prepared for them. Is there anything else as far as estate planning that's vital that our viewers should know?
Well, I think that they should certainly consider having all four of these documents. It's the only thing that provides total coverage for anything that could possibly happen. Certainly the will takes effect after the party passes away. So that's kind of the final document.
Right.
And that tells you how do you want your assets distributed, who's going to get what,
right,
and how should we do it. But there's no real reason why everybody shouldn't have it. You got to kind of think of the people you're leaving behind, and not
Absolutely.
so much thinking about yourself. Would you want your wife or your daughter
right,
to walk into a terrible problem like this with the family fighting over this or that? I mean, you can avoid all
or
that.
siblings just arguing about what mom or dad wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least if it's written, there's no one to argue it. There is no discussion. This is what it is. This is what they wanted. These were their last wishes.
Well, that's
So
the goal
important.
that you want
Right.
to strive for. It
Right.
really is.
Right. So moving on, and that's such wonderful information. So that ties in obviously with our next portion of our show, which is a living will. It's a document defining your right to die. This is something that no one likes to talk about. Sometimes it's even hard to say.
Yeah.
But a living will is a living will. And so can you explain that just a little bit more and why it's so important, and share some examples as well?
Sure. I think we can go back to the earlier example of the car accident. Somebody is brought in unconscious to the hospital. They have little or no brain function left. They're in a very severe condition. And what's the extent that person would want a machine to keep his heart pumping, his lungs pumping? How do you want that done? And importantly, who do you want to have the say in stopping them or discontinuing those functions of the breathing machine and the heart machine? And this is, again, where you have to pick people that you think can actually make that decision.
Right.
I would think that it's not an easy decision for somebody to make.
Absolutely.
To terminate that.
Absolutely. I want to remind our viewers with us today is Mr. Burt Brown, law offices of Burt A. Brown on Wacker Drive here in Chicago. If you have any questions regarding today's show or questions about any of what we're discussing, you can reach him at area code 312-236-5582, extension 229. So, Mr. Brown, if I want to make changes to a living will, how can I make those changes?
Well, number one, Lucy, you can absolutely change any of the terms and conditions in your living will at any time you feel like changing them. Again, this is the person's wishes. They're his wishes. And those changes, people get older, things happen in their family, and this should be something that's almost a fluid thing where it changes from time to time as people's conditions change. So one of the ways you do it is you pick up the phone, you call your lawyer and say, I have some changes I'd like to make in my living will. The first thing I would ask if I got that phone call is, what kind of changes do you want to make? What's going on with you that is new? And then we would arrange to actually write up those in a formal form. Now, one of the things that I should bring out is you can't do that yourself. And that's not because lawyers just want to be able to charge a fee. There's certain formalities that have to be followed in either a will or changing a living will. And those formalities vary from state to state to a certain degree.
So all these templates you see online, one example, you have hundreds of templates online.
Yes.
That tells you don't need someone with a legal background to do this.
Well, all I can tell you is that that's very bad advice.
Right.
And the problem is, let's just assume that you want to use one of those templates online.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem is you don't know what the legal formalities are for your particular state.
Right.
If you make a mistake, and you're really more likely to make a mistake doing it this way, your changes probably will not take effect.
Mm-hmm.
You may wind up with a result that's just the opposite of what you intended to have,
Mm-hmm.
and now you have created a worse mess. Changing things in a living will is not a very expensive thing to do. It's not a big project. It's just like amending a will or any other of these documents which we've told you about.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be notarized. They have to be witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
And the terminology that you use and stuff should be the proper terminology. If you use the wrong terminology,
Mm-hmm.
you may not get the effect that you're looking for or that you desire.
So can you tell us what are some of the things that are in a living will?
Well, living wills are a little different than a will. Is a lot more broad in its content. Living wills basically are limited to medical things,
Mm-hmm.
treatment, termination of treatment. How long do you keep somebody on a breathing machine to hope on a whim and a prayer that their brain function returns? Who do you consult? A lot of these living wills have a clause that says that they want the opinion of at least 2 doctors,
Right.
that there will be no return and there's no chance of recovery, and you have to name them.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can allow whoever has the power to
Mm-hmm.
select who those doctors are. They would most likely be the treating doctors at the hospital where you are.
Sure.
You can change that, but the basic content of it is really deals with prolonging life, terminating life, the methods to be used, the methods not to be used, and who has the decision-making power on that, and how do you go about exercising that power.
Right. Now, I know this happens a lot. I hear individuals tell me, Lucy, took your advice. I did my will. I did my living will. I'm ready to go. So if it happens today, I'm good. I'm set. Except that they put it away and don't remember where they put it.
Very important.
Or they don't tell anyone about it.
Yeah. And you don't need anybody's permission that's
Right.
in your will to make any changes. But the problem is, if in the example of the living will, this is probably one of the most important. The people that you name in there that are going to have the decision-making power should know where you keep that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're looking for it and you can't find it, those wishes are not going to be carried out, I can tell you that. So you should tell them, or you can even give them a copy of it. That's up to you if you want to do that. But you should certainly tell them, this is where I'm keeping this. If you need to find it, that's where you go to look. And that way it can take effect.
Yeah, we get that often. Sometimes when we're out there and just talking to individuals, it's like they put it away so well they forget where
Yeah.
they put it, or they end up writing another one. And sometimes they have 2 and 3 copies, and in many cases they're all different.
And in that case, and that's true with wills too, it would be the latest one in time, the last one that they did, and that one may not really reflect what they think it should reflect too. So when you have multiple copies, the best practice is always to destroy the old ones.
Right.
And you can destroy it by just shredding it, tearing it to pieces, throwing it out. And the same with the will as well.
So we've talked a little bit about living wills and estate planning. And so something like this, how expensive can it really be? If anyone can afford this, how expensive can it really be?
Well, I think, 1, anybody can afford it. 2, it's a necessary expense. And it's something that's just part of life that you really have to do. In the case of somebody who has limited assets, and we're not doing tax planning, for example, and you're not setting up AB trusts or something in somebody's estate planning, it's something that is well within the reach of anybody with just a kind of a medium income.
Right. So are we talking in the hundreds?
We're probably talking in the hundreds
Okay.
for each of the documents.
Okay. But it is something that's doable, and it's something that really should be done, especially if you have estates, if you have just anything, or as you mentioned earlier, just your own valuables, what you treasure, and who you want those treasures to go to. It may not be important to anybody else. It may not be worth anything to anybody else, but it's worth something to you.
It's worth the peace of mind.
That's right.
That you're taking care of. You know, I have a client now that probably doesn't have long to live, and one of the big emphatic things of this fella is that he did not want to leave any problems for his wife when he finally passes away, and he's been meticulous in that. And you know, this is probably going to wind up saving that lady untold hours of anguish and worry and expense. So it's something that's relatively low cost to take care of now, would be very expensive later for a widow or the family members to clean up later.
Right.
And I admire that fellow a lot.
I truly believe that, because I've actually done the same thing. I have actually laid everything out to the detail, because I don't want anyone having that discussion even. It's just, this is what she wants, and this is what it is. There is no discussion. This is it.
That's absolutely the way it should be, and should be for everybody.
Mr. Brown, if there's any advice you can give, what would it be?
Well, I think the best advice is that you should start thinking about these things. As you said earlier when we started, Lucy, it's not a pleasant topic to think about because it involves death, and it involves your death, which is even more sensitive. I think that people should start thinking about that, and eventually they'll bring themselves to pick up the telephone and call somebody to have it done properly. These documents sometimes can go on for years and years before you have to make any changes to them. And the cost of fixing a problem later is so expensive for the people you leave behind. So it's really, you're doing a good thing for those people by having the attitude, like you just said, that you've laid everything out, and it just takes all the anguish away.
Absolutely. Well, our time here goes so quickly.
It certainly does.
We got to make sure that we have you back, because this topic, even though it's one that was spent in the last 25 minutes, it's a very important topic.
It is.
And it's something that I believe should be revisited and remind our viewers of the importance of having such documents. And, you know, it's not something they have to do all at once, but they can do part of it and then come back and do the other part of it, if need be. And that they can
could do that.
Right, and they can work that out with whomever legally that they speak to. And there's legal aid out there, and there's all these kind of places that you can go to for that kind of advice.
And you know, the hospitals are getting so adamant about having proper documentation today. You certainly don't want to be in a hospital seeking some kind of treatment, and all of a sudden you have a problem with the documentation. And then what do you do?
Well, I know with Illinois Masonic and all the hospitals, at least to my knowledge, is that there has to be, if you're going for treatment, you're admitted. Everyone is being asked to sign a living will.
And a lot of them also require powers of attorney for health care. When John Smith shows up and says, well, I'm the one holding the power, they're going to want to see that.
Right.
They're not going to take anybody's word for it, and I can understand that as well.
Have to show a paper copy. Mr. Brown, on behalf of all my colleagues at Hispocare and Advocate Illinois Masonic Hospital, our partner Gottlieb Memorial Hospital, Mr. Brown, thank you for being on our show today.
It's my pleasure,
Lucy.
Lucy.
Appreciate you coming out
really
and sharing with us such important information. I hope to get you back. Come back and visit us again.
Be our
Let's
pleasure.
discuss this again and maybe take it even further. And some other topics that are important to community, this information. So on behalf of all of us, thank you. My name is Lucy Aquino. I represent Hispocare and Advocate Illinois Masonic Hospital. Is one of their programs, and I'd like to thank you for watching CAN TV 21. Until next time, we invite you to stay tuned for more important information coming up. Thank you again, Mr. Brown.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having us.